He always had control over his business, over his decisions, over his life. Nothing happened without his say, and he made sure of it. People followed his rules, respected his authority, and understood that he was not the kind of man who made mistakes. But then she walked in. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. She was just another name, another face, another person passing through his world without leaving a mark. He had built walls around himself, high and unshakable, ensuring that no one could touch what lay beneath. And for years, it worked until she didn't follow his rules. She didn't fall in line the way everyone else did. And that infuriated him. From the moment she entered his life, she was a disruption, a force he couldn't predict, a presence he couldn't ignore. She challenged him in ways no one ever had. Her sharp words, her refusal to back down, the way she looked him in the eye without fear, it was frustrating. Maddening, and yet, it was the first time in a long time that he felt alive. He should have pushed her away, should have reminded her who was in charge. But every time he tried, she slipped through his grasp, leaving him more unsteady than before. It was infuriating and addictive. The more he tried to resist, the more she pulled him in. She wasn't intimidated by his power, wasn't impressed by his wealth, and wasn't interested in playing by his rules. She had her own way of doing things, and she wasn't afraid to stand her ground. He told himself it was just a game, that he would win like he always did, that she would eventually fall in line, just like everyone else. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a game he could control, because for the first time in his life, he was the one falling, and he had no idea how to stop it. The days that followed were a test of patience he didn't know he needed. She was everywhere, yet nowhere within his reach. She occupied his thoughts in a way no one ever had, slipping into the quiet moments of his day. When he least expected it, she wasn't trying to impress him. That much was obvious. Most people around him carefully measured their words, cautious of saying the wrong thing, but she spoke without hesitation. She questioned his decisions, challenged his authority, and seemed to enjoy watching him wrestle with frustration. At first, he told himself that was all. It was annoyance, a clash of personalities, a problem he needed to solve. But if that were true, why did he keep seeking her out? Why did he find himself looking for her in a crowded room, catching himself waiting for the next time she would challenge him? She wasn't like the others. That much was clear. She had her own goals, her own ambitions, and she didn't seem to care whether he approved of them or not. She wasn't reckless. She was calculated in the way she moved, always aware, always 2 steps ahead. But she wasn't seeking control. She just wanted freedom, and maybe that's what unsettled him the most, because he had spent his entire life building control over everything around him, and here she was, completely untamed, completely unpredictable. He didn't know how to handle her, and that irritated him more than he wanted to admit. So he did what he always did. He tried to figure her out. He watched her, studied her, tried to piece together what drove her. But the more he learned, the more questions he had. She was confident, but guarded. Strong, but somehow vulnerable in ways she didn't let others see. He caught glimpses of it sometimes, in the way she would pause before answering a question, or in the way her smile would falter for just a second before she pulled it back into place. He told himself it didn't matter, that she didn't matter. But that was a lie, and he was beginning to realize that no matter how much he tried to fight it, he was losing this battle. Because no matter how much he wanted to be the one in control, she had already done something no one else had managed to do. She had made him feel something real, and that terrified him. He told himself it was just curiosity, that he was only trying to understand her because she was unpredictable, and unpredictability was a weakness he couldn't afford. But deep down, he knew better. It wasn't just about control anymore. Something about her unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite define. She wasn't just different from the people in his world, she was completely unaffected by it. The things that usually impressed or intimidated others meant nothing to her. Money, power, status, none of it held her attention. And yet, she was here, constantly colliding with his life, refusing to be ignored. The more time he spent around her, the harder it became to keep his distance. She wasn't trying to get close to him, but somehow she was. Without effort, without intention, she was becoming someone he noticed, even when she wasn't there. Then came the night that changed everything. It started with an argument. Sharp words exchanged in the dim glow of city lights, frustration spilling over as neither of them backed down. He had never met someone so determined to challenge him, to stand her ground, even when she had every reason to walk away. "You think you know everything," she said, her voice edged with something more than just anger. "But you don't. You think you can control people the way you control everything else, but you can't." He took a step closer, his voice lower now. "And you think you're any different?" Her eyes locked onto his, something unreadable flickering in them. "I don't try to control people. I just don't let them control me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them had shifted into something heavier, something neither of them were ready to name then. Before he could say anything else, she turned and walked away. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because later that night, she disappeared at first. He told himself it wasn't his problem, that she could handle herself. But as the hours stretched on with no sign of her, a different kind of frustration settled into his chest, one that felt dangerously close to fear. He didn't like this. He didn't like not knowing where she was, not knowing if she was okay, and the worst part? He realized he had never felt this way before, because control wasn't just slipping through his fingers now. It was gone, and he had no idea what to do about it. The silence was the worst part. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, and yet here he was, checking his phone every few minutes, waiting for something, anything that would tell him where she was. It didn't make sense. She wasn't the type to just vanish. She was independent, strong-willed, the kind of person who didn't let anything shake her. But something was wrong. He could feel it. He called the last person he knew she had been with, but all they could say was that she had left alone, saying she had something to take care of. That didn't sit right with him. She was careful, always aware of her surroundings. She wouldn't have just walked into danger. Not unless she didn't see it coming. His mind raced through the possibilities, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized the truth he had been avoiding. This wasn't just concern. This wasn't just a problem to solve. This was personal. He couldn't sit still anymore. He needed to find her. The first place he checked was her apartment, but it was dark, untouched. No signs of a struggle, nothing out of place, but also no sign that she had been there at all. He stood in the center of the room, the quiet pressing down on him, frustration burning under his skin. Then he noticed something. A small piece of paper on the counter, something hastily scribbled and half crumpled, as if she had written it in a rush. He picked it up, scanning the words, his pulse quickening. A name, a location, and suddenly, it all made sense. She hadn't just disappeared. She had gone looking for something. And now, she was caught in the middle of something she wasn't prepared for. He was already moving before he could think twice. The drive was a blur. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, his mind replaying every moment, every conversation, trying to figure out what she had gotten herself into. He had warned her before. There were people in his world who weren't to be crossed. Lines that shouldn't be walked, but she never listened. And now, she was paying for it as he neared the address on the paper. He felt it, that familiar instinct, the sharp awareness that something wasn't right. The building was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that held something dangerous beneath it. He stepped out of the car, his pulse steady, but his mind racing. He wasn't afraid. He never was. But this time, the stakes were different, because this wasn't business. This wasn't power. This was her. And if anything had happened to her, there wouldn't be a force in the world that could stop him. The night air was thick with tension as he moved toward the building, his instincts sharp, every step calculated. He didn't rushing, led to mistakes, and he couldn't afford any now. His mind replayed every possibility, but none of them prepared him for what he found when he stepped inside. She was there, standing in the dim light of the warehouse, her back against a metal pillar, hands bound in front of her. But she wasn't afraid. She wasn't pleading. She was staring straight at the man standing in front of her, someone he recognized all too well. This wasn't just some random threat. This was personal. The realization hit him like a cold wave. She hadn't stumbled into danger by accident. She had been lured here. And now, she was being used as leverage against him. The man standing opposite her smirked, his voice smooth, but laced with something sharper. "I was wondering when you'd show up." His jaw tightened. He had played this game before, knew how these situations worked. But this time, it was different. Because this time, she was the one caught in the middle. She met his gaze across the room, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in her expression. Not fear, not anger, something else. Something unspoken. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about power or control. She had known she had chosen to come here. His pulse pounded in his ears as the pieces fell into place. She hadn't been taken. She had walked into this, knowing the risks. She had been searching for answers, for the truth. And now, she had become the perfect bait. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. But there was no time for that now, because whether she had meant to or not, she was in real danger, and he was the only one who could get her out of it for a moment. The world seemed to slow. He stood at the edge of the confrontation, his mind racing through every possible outcome. She was looking at him now, something unspoken in her gaze, a silent challenge. She had known what she was walking into. She had made the choice. But did she understand what it meant? The man holding her wasn't just some small-time threat. He was someone with power, someone who had been waiting for an opportunity like this. And now, he had the upper hand. "I have to admit," the man said, his smirk never fading, "I didn't think she'd be the one to get you here. But here you are. And here she is." His grip on control was slipping, but he refused to let it show. He had faced worse. He had walked into danger before, but never like this. Never with her at stake. "I'm here," he said evenly, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. Let her go, a quiet chuckle. "You think it's that simple?" The man tilted his head. "You've spent your whole life controlling everything. But you can't control this." She hadn't spoken, but her eyes hadn't left him. There was something in the way she held herself, not defeated, not afraid, but waiting. Calculating. She was waiting for something. And then he understood. She wasn't just a pawn in this game. She had been playing her own. It happened fast. Too fast. She moved first, a quick shift in her stance, a flick of her wrist. The rope binding her hands had never been as tight as it looked. In one swift motion, she broke free, spinning toward the man holding her with a sharp, unexpected strike. The surprise on the man's face was brief, replaced by anger, but he had underestimated her, and so had he. The room erupted into chaos. He was already moving, closing the distance between them in seconds. The fight was quick, brutal. He had always known how to win a battle, but this wasn't just about him anymore. She fought too. And she fought well. By the time it was over, the man who had set the trap was on the ground, unconscious. The tension that had gripped the room just moments before finally broke. She turned to him, breathing hard, her expression unreadable. "You really thought I needed saving?" He stared at her, still processing everything. "You walked into a trap," she shrugged. "I knew you'd walk in after me." There was no arguing with that. Silence settled between them, heavier than before. Everything had changed. The control he had clung to for so long was gone. And yet, for the first time, He didn't care because the truth was, she hadn't just stolen his control, she had stolen his heart. The silence between them stretched for a long moment, neither one willing to break it first. The weight of everything that had just happened hung in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. She was still catching her breath, her hands slightly shaking from the adrenaline. He could see it. She had been prepared, had walked into this knowing the risks, but that didn't mean it hadn't affected her. He wanted to say something, but for once, words failed him. He had spent so much time convincing himself that he controlled everything, that he could dictate the outcomes of every situation. But here she was, proving him wrong in every way. She finally looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. So, what now? He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Now we get out of here, she nodded, but there was something hesitant about it. As if she wasn't just talking about the present moment, but everything that had led them here. He didn't press. Not yet. They stepped out into the night, the weight of what had just happened still lingering between them. The city around them was alive, unaware of the chaos they had just left behind. It was strange how the world kept moving no matter what happened. How nothing seemed to stop, even when everything inside you had shifted. As they reached his car, she hesitated before getting in. He watched her, waiting. "You don't have to worry about me," she finally said, her voice softer now. "I'm not some fragile thing you need to protect." He leaned against the car, studying her. "I know." She tilted her head slightly, skeptical. "Do you?" He sighed. "I know you can take care of yourself. That doesn't mean I won't worry." Something flickered across her face, something she didn't want to admit. He could see it, even if she wasn't ready to say it out loud. The drive was quiet. Not uncomfortable, but full of the things they weren't saying yet. He had never been one for unnecessary conversation, and she seemed to understand that. Maybe that was why she unsettled him so much. She didn't just challenge him, she understood him in ways no one else ever had. When they finally reached her place, she didn't move to get out right away. Instead, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This doesn't change anything, does it?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She looked away for a second, as if debating whether to say it. Then she met his eyes again. "You're still you. And I'm still me. And we're still standing on opposite sides of whatever this is." He wanted to argue, to tell her that things had already changed, whether she wanted to admit it or not. But instead, he just said, "Maybe." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "Then I guess we'll see how this ends." She got out of the car before he could say anything else. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he had won or lost. Days passed, but she was still in his mind. He told himself he had done what needed to be done, that he had made sure she was safe. But that wasn't enough anymore, because the truth was, it had never just been about her safety. It had never just been about control. It was about her. And whether he was ready to admit it or not, he knew he couldn't go back to the way things were before. She had changed everything. And the worst part? He didn't want to change it back. Their paths crossed again sooner than he expected. Or maybe he had been looking for an excuse. Either way, when he saw her again, she didn't look surprised. She just crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. "You again?" He smirked slightly. "You sound disappointed." She sighed, but didn't deny it. "What do you want?" He hesitated just for a second. Then finally, he said what he should have said that night. "To see where this ends." For the first time, she didn't have a quick response. But she didn't walk away either. And that was enough.